When we say that God is creator, we don't just mean that God is responsible for our stuff. We mean that God has shaped us, has ordered the universe, has formed it. Genesis puts it this way: in the beginning, when God made the heavens and the earth was unformed and void. Professor Longman says a big muddy ball, just generic. But God is still being creator in the whole rest of Genesis 1 and beyond. So God forms the unformed, orders it, distinguishes it from itself, and details the universe. The earth was formless and void. The Hebrew for that is cute. Tohu wabohu. All right, the earth was tohu wabohu. It was formless and it was empty. And there's a spirit from God hovering over the surface of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was. And God separated the light from the darkness. The light he called day, the darkness he called night. And that evening and morning were one day. So, just on day one, God has distinguished light from darkness. On day two, God separated the waters above from the waters below by making an expanse in between. And the expanse he called sky. So there's further separation and forming. On day three, God caused the water to recede from the ground, and there was earth. And the water then was seas. And God caused plants to grow out of the surface of the earth, seed-bearing plants. Days 1, 2, and 3 give you this progression from being formless to being formed. The heavens are formed. The earth is formed. But it's all empty. And so, day 4, God starts filling what God made on day 1. He fills the day with the sun, and he fills the night with the moon and the stars. He says, "Let there be lights in the expanse, in the heavens." On day 5, God makes water creatures in the seas, and he makes sky creatures and tells them to be fertile and increase. And so what God has made on day 2, formed, God populates on day 5. Do you see a pattern here? On day 6, God populates the earth with earth creatures, cattle, creeping things, wild beasts. And they are told to be fruitful and increase. And God also makes Adam, humanity. More on Adam later on. But the Hebrew word Adam simply means humanity. It's where we get the name Adam. And God gives the creatures on day 6 that live on what he made on day 3, he gives them the vegetation and the seed-bearing plants to eat. So on day 4, 5, and 6, God populates and fills what was made on days 1, 2, and 3, respectively. And it closes with an epitaph. The heavens and the earth were finished, and all their array. They were formed, they were filled, and it was very good. And God rests on the 7th. There's a kind of doctrine of creation built into Israel's worship life, in that it spends its week the way it does. A kind of obedience in the service of God the Creator by working 6 days and taking the day off the way God did. What's the most faithful way to read that language? It's not straightforwardly evident that a literal interpretation of biblical language is always best. Sometimes a literal interpretation of biblical language will get you into trouble. If someone's reading love poetry to you from the Song of Solomon and says, "Your eyes are doves," so feathers and all? When and where is the Bible being literal? When and where are biblical passages being figural, symbolic, etc.? I don't think young earth creationists, day age, old earth creationists, or theistic or Trinitarian evolutionists, I don't think any of those schools of thought are inherently unfaithful or inherently run counter to the gospel. So although it's an important question and they can't all be right, I don't think the integrity of the faith hangs on your particular answer to that question. So what do we see here? Specifics matter. It's not just the abstract creation that displays our relationship to a trustworthy God, the God of Israel, but the details of the universe do too. I asked you to read Psalm 104, which makes the same point in a completely different narrative in a different sequence. And it just goes on, doesn't it? Hey, look, the storks, the junipers, the rock badgers, the lions. And you're like, yeah. But, you go to the biology department, all that detail gets them excited. They just go on and on about all these different species and their relationships and all these different habitats and ecosystems. And maybe you're like, I think I'll be a physics major. But then you go over there and they're all excited about all the totally varied phenomena of the cosmos and geology and the Earth itself. And gosh, we just love all this complicated world that we have. God gets the credit for that as well. Forms it, fills it, details it, arranges it, relates it to itself, relates night to day, relates sky to birds, animals to plants, heavens to earth. Puts us all in right relationships. There's a great line from Psalm 104. How many are the things you have made, O Lord, and you've made them all with wisdom. Wisdom captures an aspect of the goodness of related creation, diversified and arranged creation. And wisdom is a word that comes to describe the one through whom all things were made. Christ is the wisdom and power of God. It is through word, let there be, let there be, let there be, that God makes all these many things out of one another. And so when Christians are straining to describe who we've come to know in Jesus Christ, the Gospel of John reaches back to Genesis 1 and riffs on it. In the beginning was, you're waiting for the heavens and the earth, right? Well, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and by the Word all things were made. All those detailed things. So the complexity of life reflects the wisdom and the logic of its creator. Let's talk in greater detail about this conviction that God detailed the universe. And so the details of the universe are good and praiseworthy and show God to be trustworthy. And let's do that by giving you some alternatives, by showing you ways of thinking about the universe that don't share that conviction, and ask, what difference does it make? One rival I want to show you is Gnosticism. This is not agnosticism, and it's not the opposite of agnosticism. Gnostics were a name for a set of people with a widely varying set of beliefs, but with some commonalities. And some of them are Christian, some of them are not. At least Jesus plays a part in some of their pictures, and in other pictures that he doesn't. So what do Gnostics believe? This is going to sound a lot like Platonism, so you need to be careful. I'm going to give you a pretty subtle distinction. Platonists believe that God, or whatever you call the ideal, the good, operated on a pre-existing material universe. God's work in that realm can be imperfect at best, partial at best. And if we want to know who God is, we have to look beyond or through that imperfection to that perfect and real creator beyond. All right, that's Platonism. Gnostics believed something different. They believed that the creator made the stuff of the universe and shaped the stuff of the universe. But they believed that the inferiority of the universe, its brokenness, its limits, etc., indicate brokenness and limitation and inferiority on God's part, on the part of the Creator. So an inferior universe implies an inferior Creator. And a basically bad world. So there's a kind of degradation of quality in each level you go down. So the high God is perfection. The next one is near perfection. Really good, just not 100%. For Valentinius, there were 365 levels of pairs of beings that were called eons. And each had its own name. Kind of a pantheon, in a way. A hierarchical pantheon of beings. And the one right above us was Yahweh, the Creator. How do you account for evil in the world? How do you account for change and death and disease and all the rest? Well, Gnosticism had an answer. The Creator himself is evil, and the details of the world are bad as well. And poor Israel, it worshipped this Creator. It worshipped an inferior being. Jesus came, or the Savior, whatever the Savior is, came representing not the Creator God, not the God of Israel, not the God that we're worshiping in Psalm 104, but a higher deity. The God of love, the God of true perfection. Salvation, then, is getting our souls out of this material world, getting the better part of us free from the worse material part of us. So, how do you live here? How do you live as a Gnostic? Well, your mission is to escape. Your mission is to leave. Get out of the matrix. Get back to reality. Be delivered from the architect. The Matrix. How many of you have seen The Matrix? Lots of you. The Matrix is Gnosticism combined with Buddhism, combined with John Woo and some leather. And Alice in Wonderland. But they took some of, the Wachowski brothers took some of their imaginative cues from Gnosticism, Christian Science, 19th century Christian movement, which was a rehash of Christian Gnosticism. Well, how do you live? Well, you live differently. You don't pray Psalm 104, that's for sure. How many are the things you've made them all with wisdom? No. Get me out of here. Beam me up. Operator. It's a totally different story, where we have a totally different relationship with the world. And the world does not indicate a trustworthy God that we follow. Okay? The world has been pulled over our eyes, Morpheus says. Don't trust it. Don't be enslaved to it. One more alternative. I don't have a good simple title for this. I've looked around. But it looks like natural law in the tradition of Cicero in the Renaissance, which holds that God is responsible for the abstract rules and principles by which the universe operates, rather than the specificities, which are arbitrary outworkings of those rules or principles. So let me put it to you this way. God didn't make you or me or even human beings or badgers or storks or junipers. God made the laws of physics. And the laws of physics play out in such a way that you happen to end up with species, a plant kingdom and an animal kingdom and the different varieties within. But God is not behind badgers. God is just the designer at a level of abstraction. So, to uncover those abstractions, to uncover those natural laws or principles, is to really get inside God's mind. And this is how science specials talk on PBS. You know, this is the God of Nova, where the Hubble Space Telescope will cue us into God, or the Higgs boson is the God particle, because if we discover that, we'll know what God was thinking. This is a pretty influential way to think in this kind of natural law tradition, where God is more the designer, legislator, than the executor. It's the legislative branch, not the executive branch. Does that mean that to affirm any theory of the evolution of species from other species according to rules like survival of the fittest or adaptation, etc., does that make them theologically problematic? I mean, does that mean that Christians can't accept those? It could mean that. I think you could read evolution as you could read evolution out of a natural law tradition that meant that species were arbitrary, that maybe even the whole universe is arbitrary. It's all just one random exercise. That really is going to come into a collision course with the faith of Israel here. Because the glory that Israel sees, the glory that the church sees in the particularities, not just the generalities, isn't being acknowledged there. Moreover, it seems to rob the universe of purpose, other than just maybe the pleasure of a designer seeing it play out. That's not the God that we see in Jesus. That's not the God Israel sees delivering it. So that's a problem. And for that reason, I think Christians need to be critically appreciative of theories of evolution and theories of the universe's evolution that get carried away into thinking of everything as abstract and arbitrary, and God is not involved in any way but abstraction. On the other hand, we know the natural processes that create human beings. They don't require any intervention on God's part. And we even know, you can even use sociology or even game theory to work out the kinds of behaviors that lead to the mating behaviors that produce us. Fine. But I'm not an abstraction, and neither are you. I'm a person, and so are you. And God relates to us as persons. So even though we know all that natural information, through observation, through science, through just experience, it doesn't cause us to attribute only generality to God. Right? You know God is in your life, making you who you are. You've seen God in other people's lives, making them who they are. If that's true of persons, human persons, then there's no reason it can't be true of species, groups of persons, generations, cultures, tribes, whatever. By the same principle that God relates to us as concrete beings, God can relate to humanity as a concrete thing, even if humanity is in flux, even if it had a pre-human evolutionary history, even if it has a future evolutionary course, or multiples. If we rule evolution out because it's too generalized and too regularized, we rule out human reproduction as producing significant human beings. And it does produce significant human beings. People can draw problematic implications from evolution, however, and we need to be on the guard against that. I already mentioned humanity there, and the next place we'll go is an excursus to talk about humanity in particular, because that's where Genesis 1 ends.